So I'd like to call the Capital Outlay Committee meeting to order for December 3rd, 2024 at 10:05. You want to start with old business? Oh, why don't we just go around in the room and everybody introduce themselves?
Sure. Mark Kelleher, Finance Committee.
Scott Norm, Finance.
Rich Larius, Town Administrator.
Ann Tucker, Planning.
Martha Donovan, Select Board.
Paul Doan, serve at the pleasure of the Town Administrator.
Frank Weiss, Select Board.
I'm joined to my left by our newly minted, or reminted, Interim Finance Director, Town Accountant Ed Spellman.
Okay, and online is Frank, do you want to?
Frank Weiss, Select Board.
Thank you. So why don't we start with old business? Can I have a motion to approve the minutes of November 21st?
So moved, Madam Chairman.
Second. Have a second?
Second.
All in favor? I
Aye.
have to do a roll call.
Roll call.
Mark?
Aye.
Aye.
Frank is an aye.
Scott.
Aye.
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 Okay, 5-0. So we're going to start with the presentation. What? Oh, 7-0. Oh, I'm so used to us not being a full contingent, sorry. I'm slow this morning, I haven't had all my coffee.
Amen to that.
So do you want to bring Sean up and talk about the Brooks Academy Museum?
Certainly. So, Sean, if you just want to come up to the table, have a seat in case there's questions. But, Madam Chair, members of the committee, as you may know, the Select Board met last night following the stakeholder meeting last week. So what you have in front of you now is an endorsed capital project request application. I can walk you through that. So it is through DPW, specifically facilities maintenance. And so it's Brooks Academy renovations, which is at 80 Parallel Street. So project description says rehabilitation of Brooks Academy Museum building envelope, bringing the renovated building into ADA compliance. Benefit, impact, delaying purchase/project. This finalizes a long-standing renovation project of a critical, irreplaceable community historical building while enhancing accessibility, long-term stability of the structure, and supports the program uses of the tenant, the Harwich Historical Society. It's always pointed out to me that if the committee members who are present would like to look straight ahead, there you go on the left, on your right, stage left. Project financing, the estimated cost is $1,300,149. Let me try that again, $1,300,149. We hope that carries us for 25 years to the building. And you can see that we're asking for this for July 1st, 2025, with an expected and hoped completion by the following fiscal year end. And last but not least, operating cost impact. The operating cost impact is negligible if funding comes from other sources and uses and not from the tax levy. This project is augmented by current available funds, including funds from the 2023 Annual Town Meeting, Article 47, which has a balance. That balance date is last week, but is still effect of $309,851. And the 2023 Annual Town Meeting, Article 27, which was a CPC article, same thing, the balance, current balance is $690,000. All in, then, the total estimated available funds would be $2,300,000. 149, I suppose.
So questions? We've sort of walked the project, reviewed it with you and the Historical Society, but if anybody has any additional questions, now would be the time.
This is just a little bit up from it had been 1-1 the
Yes.
last time we looked.
Correct.
Okay.
During last week's joint committee, we had discussed going up for contingencies.
Contingencies, great.
Just a quick question. I watched the meeting last night, just so I'm clear. The total estimated available funds would be $2.3 million plus the $1.3 million on this capital project request?
No,
Within the 2.3 is the 1.3 million?
correct.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So, yep.
Does it appear on here?
No, because it hasn't been approved yet. Hadn't been approved by the time it was published. It was approved last night, so there was no time to add it yet.
Where would it appear?
It would appear under facilities maintenance, Second from the bottom, 80 Parallel Street, Brooks Academy.
Right.
Fiscal year 2026, the sum of $1,300,149.
So then facilities maintenance would be like 1.6 or 1.7?
Yeah, we could update all those numbers from the subtotal to the bottom line total.
And we can vote on this today.
So that makes the annual total for that year, for next year is,
1 sec.
About to be calculated.
1.65, 1.49.
9/8/27, 149, right?
I'm not worried about that.
So if you're adding $1,300,149 to facilities maintenance, my calculation shows that subtotal will now be $1,665,149.
Yeah, and the bottom line is 9/8/27.
Yeah. 149.
149, yep.
149, yeah.
Anything we haven't talked about?
No, I
Sean?
believe everything's
We've
been
kind of talked it
discussed.
to death, right?
So, a question, man. So the work that's going on now, interior-wise, that's gonna continue for the next, through the next, what, 5 or 6 months? Or-
Exactly. The work that's going on now, interior is for the first floor, so it'll be ready to open next spring.
In June or something, yeah. Okay, good. And if somebody was, well, I won't do that.
All right, I think we're good, Sean.
Okay, thank you.
That was quick.
Thanks, John.
Actually,
All right, so the next part was we had some
I
follow-up.
do have one other question, Andrew. The money on the CPC grant, that's, I know, sitting in some pot somewhere and available and assigned and committed to this fund. But what is the access to that? How does that work?
It's available for the siding and the windows, that's what it was specified for.
Okay.
So
Oh.
that's one portion of this entire project.
So once an architect is hired, right, and bids are made, and the contract is issued, and they get around to doing that work, they just call on those funds, they're sitting in an available pot, is that right, somewhere?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
Awesome. So next is follow-up questions. So everybody who had follow-up questions sent them to me. I consolidated them and sent them to Joe. So in your packet is a list of all of the follow-up questions. And then there were some questions for debt that we can just do when we get to debt. How's that? You okay with that, Joe?
Sure.
Okay. So Mark's question was, how are the orders for ambulances and pumpers paid for? Is there an initial deposit, and how are the balances paid for and when? How does the town account for the expenses, and is it the whole amount subtracted from what is available from free cash this year, or costed out over several years?
So I think the best way to answer these questions are, the capital plan goes from a plan to a budget. The budgets are articles. So there's going to be an appropriation related, if this all goes forward, there'd be an appropriation related to the fire department for fiscal year 2026 for the acquisition of both the ambulance and the pumper. So once we have that, those funds are available through the article, and the article lasts until it's fully expended. So we rely upon that dollar amount, and depending upon the funding source, it could either be readily available within the same fiscal year, or more often than not, available beginning with the fiscal year following. So if it's approved at Maytown meeting, they may be able to order them without any encumbrances, but the funds will be available starting July 1, and then it's merely invoice processing against that account.
Does that make sense, Mark?
It does make sense. So that, Joe, I'm sorry, I'm not that familiar with this. So does that mean that, say, like, it's $4 million, just for a figure? That money, even though we won't receive the engines or the ambulances for 3 years, does that mean that that $3 million is subtracted from the free cash we have this year and won't be available? Does that make sense, my question?
Understand the question? Fire away.
My understanding is these two projects are gonna be funded through bonding. One will be within the tax levy limit and one will be excluded. But with the town meeting vote, it's authorizing the entire project, in your example, the $4 million. At that point, the fire department can go out and contract to have these vehicles. I believe they're built, and it could be a 2 or 3 year time frame. What happens, the town has a bond authorization on the books, the fire chief can sign the contract, and 3 years from today, when the truck's delivered, in the next bond issue, we'll issue the bond for that equipment and begin paying it in that following fiscal year.
Thank you.
What's the standard life or term of the bond?
Generally, it depends on the vehicle itself. Preliminary, what I saw was that the ambulance had a useful life, and the memos talked about 8 years, replacing the oldest one. So I would anticipate doing a bond issue for 8 years for the fire engine, for the ambulance. And for the, I think, pumper truck, generally somewhere between 15 and 20 years. Again, it can, based on the historic life of the vehicles in the community.
So the goal is you're matching the maturity of, or the life of the equipment with the maturity of the debt, if you can.
Right, the state
Close
would
as you
basically
can.
set a maximum amount generally for department equipment. It's 5 years, with the exception you can document, we're replacing a fire engine every 15 years. They would allow us to bond that project for 15 years.
Mark's other request could we have a vehicle replacement schedule from the DPW and the water department for, I think Link was supposed to send us that.
Okay, I'll follow up.
And then the water department, I don't know that they had a list.
No, typically the DPW covers all of that because DPW does all vehicle maintenance.
So that list that Link had was with the exception
believe
of the
so.
safety vehicles, probably. or-
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
I guess, can I just make an observation about vehicles in general? It feels like, and I have no data to support this, there are a lot of vehicles on this plan. It's hard for me personally to figure out, like, what percentage of the fleet we're replacing every year or within 5, is it a lot or is it not a lot? It just seems like a lot. Like, it seems like the water department over the next 5 years is gonna change every vehicle, replace every vehicle. So I don't know how to get my hands around that, and I don't know if anybody else feels that way. Or if you have any thoughts on that.
I always have thoughts.
Help me understand.
well,
Help me get comfortable.
I don't know that I can accomplish that. Truly, because as I was reformatting and revisiting this document for the sake of transparency, as I've said before, there was an original version that I had that said, well, wait a second, let's break out the capital plan even further. And let me digress for a moment if I could. The motivation for me goes back 30 years with a class I took called program-based budgeting, where you should be able to drill down budgets to say, okay, and I was on the school committee at the time, so how much money are we putting into Hollis Elementary School, all in, and program-based budgeting lets you do that. So for me, it was, okay, how much are we spending on our buildings? So that's why facilities maintenance is broken out separate from public works. I went further, and I can do it, because this is essentially a spreadsheet that's a database. I can run a total and say, what's the total vehicle replacement cost for fiscal year 2026? Break that out, even though it's gonna be funded in different mechanisms perhaps. And generally speaking, the assistant town administrator and I meet annually with Maya, and one of the schedules we get are schedules of buildings. So we have all of the structures that are insured, all of the appurtenances like sheds and things like that, and we have a vehicle schedule. And if memory serves correctly, I'm gonna say it's around 170 vehicles. Now, vehicles is used loosely in the sense that they're not all roadworthy. So within that, there is some equipment, rider mowers and the such. But we do have a lot of vehicles. However, I think it's fair to say, under Link's direction and Kyle's stewardship, and my predecessor, Chris Clark. I think they did a great job of modernizing that, and that's why we can get the lists, both current and future. And in years past, Link has shared, and he can absolutely share, here's the full list of vehicles, here's the replacement schedule over the next 5 years. So they do that anyway, almost like a 5-year outlook. And then the only time it changes is if there are, accidents or failures and things of that nature.
So the department heads are not putting vehicle requests in unless it's sort of agreed upon with Link that it's necessary?
I think to be more accurate, with Kyle.
With
And
Kyle.
because it's Kyle's plan that he builds for Link, that Link builds for me, that I build for all of us. But that's the mindset towards it.
Go ahead.
Joe, I guess I should have asked this, and I should have written a question out, and I didn't see this because I was occupied, I guess, and forgot totally to put my question in writing. But as a corollary to this issue of vehicle replacement, I have, I guess, two basic questions. One is a vehicle considered, regardless of who's driving it, whether it's me or the police department, that a certain amount of mileage amounts to the same amount of wear regardless of who the driver is, or the use of the vehicle? Is that a safe assumption? In other words, if I drive 30,000 miles in my car and a police drives 30,000 miles in their car, is it assumed that the vehicles would be generally treated the same way and in the same basic level of decay?
Perhaps not.
Perhaps.
If your scenario is saying you as a private citizen in your vehicle, is that what you're
Right,
comparing it to?
right.
So remember that, for the example with a cruiser, I'm going to use an inarticulate phrase and say that they're tricked out, meaning they are built for constant use, constant running. They're retrofitted for equipment, weapons, and other tactical gear. So that sedan or that SUV, other than the markings, looks like any other vehicle, but they're not. These are, in almost every instance except for, say, probably 24 vehicles, some of which are here and over at the rec department, where you can buy them off of a dealership and they're routine office use. The other equipment we're talking about, they get beat on, and they get beat on differently than we would treat our cars. There's certainly the same level of salt and corrosion and all of that, but if you think of our cruisers, they're running constantly.
But spark plugs or whatever else goes into fossil fuel vehicles, one would assume, my point being,
So the
I
spark
guess.
plugs and things like that, we can buy in bulk and,
Yeah.
per types of vehicles.
But my question is, who came up with the idea that at 70,000 miles, we need to replace the car? I mean, when you think of it, people don't change a car, generally speaking, at 70,000 miles. Some people say it doesn't break into 100,000 miles. So, and with the age of vehicles today, I mean, I read something recently where it said vehicles are longer and longer on the roads now. The average vehicle might be something like 12 to 14 years old. So I guess my point being, is there anything magic about 70,000? Is that a municipal standard or something? Or could we say, in the town of Harwich, we'll change them at 100,000 miles? And at 100,000 miles, you'd save 25% of the cost of replacing vehicles. You wouldn't be replacing them as soon.
Did I miss something on the 70,000? Was that presented?
They said, generally, when the gentlemen were in here, the different department heads and so forth, they said, at least that's the number I kind of determined from the conversations, that at 70,000 miles, we replace the vehicles. Is that not true?
I think,
If that's not true, then
well, to me, it's not whether it's true or false. Thank you. I believe to take it back again, Kyle MacGyvers the vehicles. And I think that's been borne out, a vehicle, unless there's significant body rot or, body damage or alignment damage or anything like that, he gets every last mile out of
And-
them.
yeah.
And we, more often than not, recirculate them if we don't trade them in. So I don't think there is I don't think there's a 70,000 mile standard
Magic.
per se. Furthermore, however, department heads can ask. It doesn't mean it's gonna get on Kyle's list, and it doesn't mean it's automatically gonna get on our list. And so, for me, that's why for the 5 years I've been here, I can compare it to other communities. I know it sounds homerish, but we have a very well-established vehicle maintenance department, thanks to Kyle and his team and to Link.
Yeah, no, I know.
So no, that's why I think when you get the schedule and you can see, and Link does provide it, and there's no hesitation, you'll see that there, in some cases, there are vehicles that might be 2013s, that given what their use is, we may get them, not replace them until 2028.
Okay, so
There's no-
basically,
there's no
my
basic
thought that there
standard.
is a magic number that sort of triggers a replacement is not really valid.
Not I don't know if I can, okay, this is not generally speaking, and not unless there's regulatory requirements from the state.
Yeah, okay, good.
Rich?
I don't even want to go there. We're
Okay.
fine.
Yeah, so I was going to go back to your question about getting comfortable with the level of vehicle replacement in any given plan. One way to do that would be with this complete list
Right.
and to see what percentage we're replacing, or even more specifically, if you want to get fancy, you could have a useful life for each vehicle, a current replacement cost for each vehicle, which would give you the annualized replacement cost. For instance, if it's a $100,000 vehicle in today's dollars and it's a 10-year life, that means that we're amortizing $10,000 this year. We might be replacing it this year, we might not be. But when you add all of that up, you have kind of an expected annual replacement cost, and then you compare that to what's in the capital plan. And you're gonna see peaks and valleys in the actual plan based upon just random failures and replacement needs. But at least then you would have a
Right.
feel for how far off that average that you might expect your current plan is.
Yeah, I think the water department was the one that just sort of struck the chord for me, because, one, they weren't, that we know of in the plan, and I want to ask that question.
Right, and if memory serves correctly, we're working with a newly installed water wastewater
Right,
superintendent.
Right, okay.
So we had an outgoing superintendent. I think Jason was very articulate in indicating, he wasn't just asking for a vehicle, he's asking for a vehicle that has an appurtenance that will be used regularly.
Right.
So that is a difference maker. And generally speaking, and I appreciate where Scott's coming from, because there are peaks and valleys, but the hope is that over time, it's smooth.
Right.
Really, the only major deviation was on the ambulances, and that was the first conversation we had, and I think we understand why
Right, right.
for that.
And so you feel comfortable that the water department's vehicles were not in the DPW's budget historically, and they just got taken out and put into water? They were actually not included, and so Jason has identified that and has added them back.
I believe that's the case.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. That was one of my questions. I'm gonna skip Scott's questions on the debt until we get into the debt. But he asked, what happens when a capital project is approved, but then does not go forward or is completed for less than the budget amount? This might be a multi-part question because the answer probably depends on the source of funding, debt, free cash, and other dedicated sources.
I'm not aware of any appropriated projects that have not gone forward. However, if there's a period of time with any projects, we, administration and finance, analyze those on an annual basis anyway. What we're looking for is, okay, if we're not using it, let's repurpose it, which would be a vote of town meeting, or let's turn it back, keeping an eye on the general fund. So I think the overall concept is if we have the money, the project goes forward. I think what we've seen with some of the capital projects that haven't gone forward is the money's not sufficient. So like I said earlier, we have an appropriation. Actually, now that I'm saying this, it's not really capital, it was a community preservation for Sand Pond restroom. They're getting that through CPC, but they have CPC funds available. When we went out to bid, it was not sufficient for the marketplace response. So they're getting a supplemental appropriation to add to that, and then we go back out to bid. So generally speaking, I think that's where we're at. We do an annual evaluation of outstanding article balances, because we don't want them hanging out there on the books, and we want to repurpose them or return them if available.
So if it was a debt-funded project, for instance, and the debt has been issued because the expense is right around the corner, I just learned a new thing, for instance, on ambulances, you don't issue the debt until you really expect to need the money, which makes sense. You don't issue it just because the article was approved. But if it was issued for $1 million for a project that was authorized for that amount, and then 2 years later you realize that it only cost $800,000, but you had already borrowed that extra $200,000, I'm just curious what happens to that money. You're paying interest on it and principal, it's sitting there somewhere, where does it go?
If you had borrowed the $1 million, spent 800, there's 200,000, those funds could be transferred to a like project. If you had a 10-year fire truck, the 200,000 could go to a 10-year building project, or a 10-year DPW snowplow.
Okay.
So
You can redirect it.
you can redirect it for a term equal to or greater than what the original purpose was.
You don't have the ability to call the debt, do you? In the market, if you,
Generally, when we issue bonds, there's a no call for the first 10 years.
Okay.
And then after 10 years, we can call the debt for those issues.
we good?
Good.
So then, this is Scott's other question. Approving the 5-year capital plan clearly involves understanding the town's capacity to take on significant obligation. This requires an understanding of the financial capacity of the town. Within the fiscal year 2023 annual comprehensive financial report, as has been the case for a number of years, it is claimed that the town maintains a 5-year budget forecast, which is also updated annually. This year, the statement appears on page 6 under relevant financial policies. I cannot find any version of this annual 5-year forecast anywhere on the town's website. May we see the most iteration of the forecast? And I just want to make sure you're talking about the operating budget.
I think so.
Okay, not the capital plan. There is the 5-year capital plan.
There's
Okay.
a plan, I've never seen a reconciliation of the actual spending, which is a whole other question that we'll deal with today. But I am talking about the operating budget, especially the debt service, and the sources of funding projected forward.
Okay. Jump into that.
So, yeah, operating budget.
So with regard to the reference and the ACFR on the 5-year budget forecast, we have a basic 5-year forecast document, and part of it comes from the Capitol. However, the gentleman to my left, now being our interim finance director, town accountant, hopefully frees up Eric Kinshirf to help me work with the Division of Local Services and their true 5-year financial forecast. The ones that we've relied upon in the past have been rather pedestrian, if I can say it that way. And what I'm trying to get to is what some of my colleagues throughout the Cape and the Commonwealth have, and really get into a stronger, deeper forecast. So that's something that I'm hoping that Eric can help me finish. I haven't been successful with the last 2 iterations of finance directors getting that done, and I need that. But that was what we would have going forward.
And then at some point, that would be public information.
Absolutely, yeah.
So we don't have one, a good one, except for perhaps 2 or 3 years ago?
So what we have is an incomplete one that I was working with DLS last year. So I think the major components that were missing was relative to debt. That's why we couldn't share it last year, because we didn't have it in a format to put it in the forecast. My hope is that Eric and I can do a multi-year. I think the concept of a 5-year outlook works for capital. I think if my memory serves correctly, Eric and I were looking at a decade on the forecast going forward.
For operating?
Correct. And I'm hoping we can get that done within this budget process. It's great information and it's critical information.
Especially since, in my opinion, we have these big projects coming up, knowing.
Well, and for me, the reason why I was really trying to get it done 2 years ago is, on the operating side, we have 8 collective bargaining agreements. So we knew that, and we forecasted that for 3 years. There's a mental forecast, if you will, and a rudimentary spreadsheet that Eric and I are using right now for the next 3 years. And then if you can life cycle that out, that's 3 years of, 3 contracts for 3 years each. That's where it really becomes critical. And even if we're just doing baseline forecast of 2.5%, it still shows. Then you add the big projects, then you add the capital, and that picture's really starting to round out.
I got something here.
Yep.
I mean, there is a difference between the requirements by the Finance Committee and the Capital Outlay Committee on operating budgets and so forth. So I don't think we have to spend a lot of time on that issue. That's where Mark and his boys get together and address the operating budget and forecasts and so forth. The overlay of, on top of the capital budget.
Which we have a 5-year.
Which we have. I'm just saying, it's not our responsibility. It's been on the financial side. Not the quote financial side, the quote of operating budgets and so forth. And a 5-year total budget per se, not a total capital budget.
I want to try to understand a couple of things here. One is, if we're going to be bonding, let's say, for a fire truck, are there some items that can't be paid with the free cash and have to be paid with a bond issue, or is that somebody's choice to fund it with A or with B, generally speaking?
Generally, it would be based on the size of the project. If you're looking to replace a ladder truck, $1.5 million, something like that, generally what you'd like to do is to bond it, pay for it over 15 years, basically match the service life to the debt service, so the residents would be paying for the portion that the residents of the community. Things like a police cruiser, much smaller, much shorter useful life. Generally, what I've done and used in other communities is we pay cash for those things, especially when it could be involved in an accident tomorrow and totaled. You don't want to have a 5-year bond issue for a cruiser that's been totaled.
Okay. And did I understand you to say that sometimes the bonds are callable, or you put a callable feature in bonds?
Not generally.
In the bond issues, there's a generally.
Always a callable feature.
Generally a 10-year.
And is it always at par? Is it called at par?
Yes.
So the decision to either use free cash or bonding is more related to the magnitude of the project than any decision about, is it politically better to use a bond issue or less, or whatever, some other decision
And
process.
also the size of free cash. Different communities have larger free cash balances. When it goes over a certain level, then they would try to bring it down to the regular level and maybe fund more projects out of free cash.
Okay, and is there a general free board or amount of free cash that should always be maintained, or is that not necessary? Is it a wise municipal policy decision to?
The GFOA, the Government Finance Officers Association, it's a nationwide
Yeah.
organization.
Right,
Their fund balance policy, they have a guidance of somewhere between 5% and 15%.
okay.
Now, some communities will take and use that goal and take free cash and general stabilization fund, combine those dollars together and compare that to the target for the GFOA. Other states,
And if I could just interject, the latter that Ed just articulated, I believe, is our policy.
Okay.
5 or 10% of, 5
Okay,
or
good.
15% of Operating budget?
General fund operating revenue or expense, it can be I mean, generally, they're close, and
Okay.
that would be, spelled out in the
That'd be a
policy.
sum.
But to Paul's question, at the end of the day, the select board gets to choose what the funding sources are, right?
So, yes, at the end of the day, the charter requires the town administrator to come with that.
Yeah.
And then, yes, as they develop the articles for appropriation, they would be solidifying or identifying.
Okay. I'm gonna leave your question on the votes till we get to the votes, Scott, okay? And your other question is debt, and my questions are debt. So are there any other follow-up questions from all the information we've heard in the last couple of weeks on the projects?
Just one other quick question. Joe, I know Peter on the Finance Committee has mentioned many times with projects, people come to town meeting with bids. I've never seen that happen. What's the story on that? Do we not come when we go to town meeting with 3 bids, or just a little bit unclear on that?
I wouldn't say that we come with bids per se, because, we can't go so far in the process without the appropriation. What the department heads are required to do is have as up-to-date estimates on the projects as possible. And so that's what you heard during these presentations and applications. I'm thinking specifically of the ambulances, of the harbor master work, things like that. They're required to go out to the marketplace and have a sense of the true appropriation. And then beyond that, we do have a minimum of 10% contingency. Now, when we were in the COVID years, we bumped that contingency up to 25%. So we do have malleability on the contingency part of it. But it's not to have bids in hands per se, because of the arduous process that goes with the bidding. And if we don't have the appropriations, we're not supposed to go forward that deep into the process. So it isn't that the bids are available, but that the cost estimates have been validated to be accurate.
Okay. So if we're done with follow-up questions, I hear no more, we'll move on to the debt presentation, and we'll let Ed do the debt presentation. And
Well,
then-
if I could, Madam Chair, in tandem with my colleagues, so what you have in front of you first is the pretty graph that's provided. This is DLS. They have wonderful data reports for all communities. So, there we go. All right.
Yeah.
Let there be light. And so what you'll see in that report is updated information that was written in by me. So what we're looking at is outstanding long-term debt for the town of Harwich as reported by and through the Division of Local Services, and you can see that this is a report I printed out just before the meeting. So what we're looking at here, first and foremost, is this is one of the biggest differences I think you'll find if you're coming in from the private sector, is we in municipal government, and certainly in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, have a critical concept known as equalized valuation, or EQV. And EQV, simply stated, and I'll look to my brother to my left to correct any of the inaccuracies that I state, but it's considered to be the true value, my words, not the state, of a municipality. So what does that mean? A town like Wellfleet has limited means, limited budget, if you will, but they're recognized in various reports as in the top 10 of equalized valuation because the land value in Wellfleet is so significant. Town of Harwich is no different. Our equalized valuation, the last report that I read, is out of the 351 communities in the Commonwealth, we are the 11th wealthiest with regard to equalized valuation. So what is the total value of the land, the property, if you will, within the town of Harwich? Now, EQV is critical because the state relies upon that for any number of decisions and grants and all of that. One of the reasons I've discovered that Cape Cod towns do not rely upon local aid is because you don't get it, and that's because most of the Cape Cod communities have an outsized equalized valuation. I used the story before when I went to Wellfleet 10 years ago. Just as the town clerk, I was shocked to realize that they gave more to the state than they got in local aid. Ed and I, coming from Braintree, an industrialized community 9 miles south of Boston, the MBTA and all of that. Local aid is to Braintree and communities off Cape like local receipts are here. So equalized valuation plays an outsized role in everything. It really differentiates between where we're at and where other communities are at. And I say that because as Ed will go through the two spreadsheets that we have, equalized valuation is relied upon heavily by the state to determine the value of a town. So it's going to come into play when it talks about our overall borrowing capacity.
Is that how they get the 129?
Correct, generally speaking.
number.
So I was chuckling because I'm going to use a random town as a comparison, say the town of Bellingham, which is a bigger town, has a lower EQV and has a lower borrowing capacity. So EQV in our reporting is going to play an outsized role, and I think it's one of the major differences if you've ever worked with debt or borrowing in the private sector versus local government and state government.
Right, because 129 million is a lot more than our revenue. So in the
Correct.
outside world,
Yep.
you know, you would be bankrupt.
And correct, and I'm probably going to do a poor job of articulating, so let me just get it out of the way. There is an element, I think, in GFOA world, so Government Financial Officers Association, and in the Commonwealth, where borrowing and debt for municipalities is good. You know, you want to have a routine debt schedule. One of the things that Ed and I talked about is, with the last two finance directors, we discontinued the borrowing $700,000 for the roads. We're going to reinstitute that because it's not a bad thing. We know that we're borrowing $700,000 for roads. We look to do that for the next 15 years. We know it's offset by Chapter 90 funds for the same level. So that's a good borrowing and a good way to use debt, and it's a routine, smooth schedule. So the other spreadsheet you have, excuse me, so one is really a graphic that says trends in municipal debt, outstanding long-term debt. And this spreadsheet actually is, if you click on, you can see the folder icon there on the pretty picture. If you were to go on the website and click on that 351 report and find Harwich, this is the data you'd come back with.
Okay.
So what Ed and I were able to do is fill in some of the blanks for fiscal year 2024. So that's why you can see total debt number was added by me, and debt as a percentage of equalized valuation was added by me. And so the spreadsheet, you can see that for fiscal years 20 through 24, what the outstanding debt was, what the equalized valuation was determined by the state at that time, then therefore the percentage of outstanding debt as a percentage of EQV. EQV and population tied together. You can see we have population growth, first of all. That's a key indication there. And then you talk about outstanding debt per capita. Then there is the general fund debt service, and then the total budget that was approved, and then what percentage of the general fund budget was debt service. And so you can see in that far right column, you know, fiscal years 20 and 21, we had outsized percentages. Spoiler alert, that's when we started borrowing for massive sewer projects. So
Outsized meaning what, Joe? Outsized of what number?
So I think normally you'd see around
10%,
You'd see about 5%. And the Commonwealth has a standard of 5%, but you can get allowances. Ed used the example for me earlier of a school building project. Well, a sewer building project would be a similar situation. But once you smooth that out, you can see that we've been and are around that 5% standard.
So can I just ask some questions about these numbers?
Absolutely. Well, let me just, if I could.
Go ahead.
Did I say anything wildly incorrect?
You're good.
Then I think we're good to start taking questions.
So the 13,600 population, that's full-time population.
That's year-round population, and I believe that number is derived by the annual census done by town clerks, not the federal census.
And these numbers include, you know, the debt for like golf or water, wastewater, but they don't include the school. Is that correct?
They do not include the schools. They are within their school budgets. And when the budget's presented to the town funds the total school budget, which is operations and
Right.
debt service.
Okay.
It's merely an assessment, so to speak, but it doesn't impact upon our
It is,
borrowing.
except we pay 75% of it.
Amen? Point is, it's not our debt.
So it's the Monomoy region, but they have no source of revenue other than, I guess, their,
They do. The assessments are predominantly it, but they do have other sources of funds. It's minimal, but they do have other
State aid.
sources.
all right. Any other questions on the
Yes.
schedules? Yes.
So I see that the debt service has declined significantly from the first year on this list, on the blue spreadsheet, from almost $11 million in fiscal 2020 to $3.5 million last year, which is great, in a sense. I wonder how it decreased so quickly from 2020 to 2021. We paid off something, or the schedule of debt payments changed dramatically in that year. Just a curiosity.
I think generally speaking, there were debts that were out there that were retired
Yeah.
going forward. And we also know that in fiscal year '26, that's when we'd start paying on the Phase 3, correct? Phase 3 sewer project, we're gonna see that number go up again, because we have another construction project coming on board.
It isn't on the big sheet yet, right?
Correct.
It's not on here yet.
Well, sorry, no.
It was approved last year, but it hasn't been, the debt hasn't
We haven't
been
been,
issued.
hasn't been borrowed.
It's debt that is approved but not yet issued.
We're talking about the SRF debt.
The 41,
Yeah, 42.
The 50
42
correct.
million?
It's been approved, authorized by the SRF.
State
And as
revolving
we
fund.
spend the funds, we submit the request for reimbursement. That will be done on a monthly basis.
So that's debt we're about to issue.
Correct.
But we're not gonna issue, so from what you're saying, we're not gonna issue the whole 42 million at once. We'll issue it as it's presented to us, and we actually spend it?
We'll spend it on a monthly basis, then we'll submit to the SRF for reimbursement. They will pay us back, and then they'll carry a note, and when the project's completed, we'll do a bond with the SRF at 0% interest for the total amount of the project.
So they're financing, basically financing us until we finish the project.
Really?
Yes.
Correct. And I'm not gonna miss the opportunity. Ed just said it sort of smoothly, 0%.
Right.
So when we talk about the debt service, the principal and interest, it's just principal.
Just
Right.
the-
But it's still, it's not insignificant.
It's not insignificant.
It helps that we don't have to pay interest
But
on it.
we, the town, have been operating under the belief that we have to sewer. The state has confirmed that, even though we're not under threat of lawsuit. So if we have to do it, I'd much rather do it at 0 than
Yeah,
2.
no, I agree.
Or anything beyond that.
I agree.
So that debt will tally up in the total debt column, total outstanding debt column as we spend on the sewers, and it'll also increase the debt service. It'll just be principal. it'll
Correct.
Increase the debt
Yep.
service.
But you said that won't happen until we finish the project, not as we accrue it.
Correct. They'll carry a short-term note for us based on the amount that they reimburse us for the actual expenses. So that they'll carry a short-term note or a bond anticipation note for the town.
So 3 years out, let's say, right, is the estimated timing of how long it will take to do the sewer, right? And it's
Yep.
starting this month. 3 years from now, it should be complete. That's when the 42 million debt will get issued.
Correct. I believe there are two different funding projects that SRF has.
Correct.
Okay,
And
so in
depending,
two pieces.
one might be
issued.
planning and design, and that could be done in the first year.
Right.
That's
The
about
balance in year 2 and 3, the construction.
Planning and design was about 4.5 million of the overall
Yeah,
project.
yeah. The thing that I'm struggling to get to is actually related to one of my questions, which is the projected level of debt service. I understand that we're not here to evaluate an operating budget forecast, but
Correct.
I think a more limited focus on what our plan that we're going to approve, what impact it has on maybe just the debt service portion of that operating budget would be a useful thing to know, to get a feel for, are we approving a plan that would result in a debt service number that is increasing dramatically? Is it just coming back to the $6 or $10 million that it was 4 or 5 years ago? That's why my other question was, what does debt service look like if we approve all these projects? And there's other things going on too. There are projects that are already approved and spending for which we haven't even issued a debt.
Right,
which
there's
is gonna
more than
add.
just the sewer, right.
There's a lot going on.
Right, right. I've asked that number, do
Is
we
it
know?
collected somewhere that could result in a debt service forecast?
Right. And that's part of the planning thing. Looking at what our debt service would be out over your 10-year period when you do the budget, the projected budget for the next 10 years.
For assumed debt,
Right, right.
yes.
So like you know what the debt is right now, you know how that's gonna get paid and what our principal and interest payments are,
Right.
that's a given. You know what's been approved but not yet funded for debt, because there could be other projects other than the, obviously the sewer is the big one, but there's others under there that could be another 10 or 15 or 20, I don't know the number. And those, you could put some assumption to when they might get issued and what, in your plan, and what the principal and interest on those are. So you would be matching sort of what's retiring, what's going on, to Scott's point. And then you have the capital plan, which you could make some assumptions about what would be debt on the and I know you hate making those kinds of assumptions, but in the corporate world, we would make assumptions and look like fools later, but we would make some assumptions about what's in the capital plan and how those go on.
Well, if I could address that, the differences are, you can look a fool in a private sector boardroom that's never gonna be televised.
I get it.
And, never gonna be perpetuated for the rest of your career, perhaps. And I'll put it out there bluntly, I've been burned by former members of this committee and other committees, that have looked at, well, wait a second, the overall plan that we're looking at is, we have to raise it based on the 1.3 figure.
it's 60
So,
million.
look at that, that's $58 million over the next 5 years. If we keep doing that, that's $200 million over the next 10 years. The next thing you know, it's $500 million.
Yeah, but this
It's that inarticulate extrapolation that concerns me.
Right.
However, I think it might be helpful if I sort of set up a question for your benefit to our finance director. So we rely upon strong vendor relations, specifically Hilltop Advisors. So the book there, if you could just hold that up for a second, Ed, so this is our prop, right? This was our last borrowing that we went out to do. We got the AAA bond rating, which was great. We did the borrowings and all that. But we work with Hilltop Advisors to say, look, as we're doing this debt, what is the schedule? There's these massive spreadsheets that I'm allergic to because they're massive on my screen
And
with all these tabs.
they're the company that is telling you what you need to pay in interest and principal.
Well, what I wanted to say is if they could describe what the Hilltop Advisors relationship is, because as Ed and I are working on the funding sources for fiscal year '26, that is a portion of borrowing, he's gonna have conversations with the financial advisors asking his magical questions. So with that, would you be willing to talk about that?
Sure.
And the process?
The town generally hires two firms, law firm, which is Lockwood, and Hilltop, which is a financial advisor for the town and for, I think, a bulk of the towns in the Commonwealth. And they help us put together the official statement. This basically is telling the public market who the town of Harwich is. This is what we do, this is how we do it. Here's our budget, here are our plans, here are our reserves, here are our fiscal policies. And on the back of this document is a copy of the ACFA, which provides additional information to the marketplace. And when we go out to sell our bonds, this document says who we are, what we do, and in conjunction with it, Standard & Poor's provides a rating for the bonds, and we've kept the AAA bond rating with them for the last two issues that I'm aware of, and basically, based on the work they do with us, with what our projects are, they look at it, we talk about the timing of a project, whether to do something 5 years or 10 years. And again, also whether it's general fund debt, enterprise fund debt being paid by the water and sewer ratepayers, or an exempted debt for a specific project. And that debt's accounted for differently. It's added on top of the tax rate when you go to figure it. So they work with us in putting this together. They also track our expenses and monitor things in the market for us. Recommend when's the best time to go out to market and where the rates are. We've had the 2 cuts in the federal funds rate going forward. If we were to sell bonds next May, again, we can ask them, what are your people seeing? Their firm, they sell bonds nationwide every day, so that we can get an idea of.
You keep
Do I
talking, I'm
need
gonna
to-
wave my hand.
No, yeah, it's motion. We've sat too long without moving. It's just, it's not,
Enthralled.
there it is, yeah.
So they provide that information to us, and I don't know if there's specific questions or if I've kind of gone through it.
Well, we started off this with the forecast of bond issuances and debt service to give us some idea of what the impact of this plan would be on those debt service numbers across this time period.
Right, because if
So
you
I don't
look,
know if-
if you look at this schedule right now, 4.3% debt servicing ratio is awesome,
Yeah,
right? But we know that's not the reality 5 years out.
the operating budget seems to be very spoiled in the past few years in terms of debt service compared to where it's going. but
Where
we
it's,
don't-
where it's going.
Yeah,
So really what you're talking about is modeling the debt service going forward. And I just want to give a nod to municipal is, and government funding, much more difficult than what all of us did on the corporate side, right? Because it's, money comes from here, comes from there, changes hands, moves along the way.
Heavily regulated.
Heavily regulated,
No more regulated industry than government by government.
right.
I
He
would say
said-
that
he said
university capital
complainingly.
planning comes a pretty close
Come
second,
close?
with donor pledges, some of which
Yeah,
are
that's
Not
really, that
really.
is
fruition,
difficult,
and some
yeah.
of which are reneged
Don't-
upon.
Right, you have to keep,
Yeah.
you have to keep
But
track of them
anyway.
separately.
But you get plugged in your model all
Yeah.
over the
Yeah.
place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is-
And guesses. as
Right,
to
you have to-
interest
you
rate
have to
and-
make assumptions,
And
right.
amortization terms and
Right,
everything else.
right.
So you're looking for the year all of this debt hits, and is there a cliff of some kind? Is that correct?
Yeah, including that, yeah.
From a policy planning standpoint here, well, 2 questions, I guess. One is, do we know the percentage of tax income that comes from non-resident versus resident? Roughly, is it 20/80, or is it?
Would we have known that through the tax rate? So I know we break it down, real estate obviously versus personal property versus commercial and things of that nature. I think there are classifications, and I know this may not be in your bailiwick. It's finance, but it's more assessing. I think there are general numbers that the assessing assumes to be correct.
And what is that?
Now, I say that assumes because you could have a resident that has more than one property. So that other property is not non-resident. It may be rental or something, but it's owned by a resident. So if we have it, it's gonna reside in the assessing department, and I think it's gonna reside in the material that we have to send to the state as part of our tax rate classification.
I believe the assessors track residential and also personal property taxes on residential for non-owner occupied residences. So that if someone's renting out or owns a home and doesn't live there, they may be paying personal property tax. And based on that number, they may become able to come up with a calculation of the residential tax rate. X percent is owner occupied, and the balance would be non-owner occupied.
So if we do have it, it'll be in reporting from the assessing department. And I think I
But
understand.
nobody's ever, there isn't a magic number like somebody knows it's 60, 70%.
It may not be magic and it may be known. I can tell you that
'Cause
for
if
the
we-
years that I worked in Wellfleet,
Yeah,
the finance officials in Wellfleet always talked about the fact that the split there was roughly 70-30.
70,
And
okay.
70 was non-resident taxpayer.
And
Yeah.
what's the
Well, that's my
pitfall?
point. I mean-
What's your point?
We've
Where are you
ju-
going with this?
Well, my point is, this number here is a
13.
population of 13,000 and a valuation of 7 trillion.
7 billion.
So, yeah.
in reality, if, in reality, it seems like there should be some relationship or adjustment for the fact that we're using a resident, full-time resident, but yet allowing the valuation to be figured on the valuation of residents and non-residents. So it kind of distorts versus a community, let's say, Braintree, where there may be 90% are resident property owners and 10% are vacation, non-resident owners.
But I might argue that the rubber hits the road more about the debt and the debt servicing number, because that's what we're actually paying.
If I could add to that, Madam Chair.
Well-
This is the state's report. We don't necessarily rely upon all these columns. I understand the point you're making.
Yeah.
This is how the state wants to report it, for whatever reason.
Okay, but it does sort of distort a bit, whether, in terms of granting local aid and so forth, if they're basing it on EQV, when in reality, the relationship of 0.6% may not truly reflect the value of the community, because they're not adding in enough people, or they're not separating the number 13,000 with the percentage of the valuation of their property. Anyway, second question is there anything here in terms of looking at this 5-year budget that would say it's good, or it's not an issue, or it's bad, that we have this rather dramatic bump up for 2 years and then a phase out again? Is there any value in sort of spreading 56 million over 5 years and do it 9 or 10 million a year rather than 5, 20, 15, and then back to 5?
Well, I think the way that we as a community have relied upon our plan, remember years past it was 7 years, then it was changed to 5 years, some towns do 10 years. What you'll see over time, and this is borne out by the reports that we have, and that's reported to the state, is we average roughly $7 million in capital expenses every year. My experience, and I'd look to more seasoned members who have been through a lot of battles, is there's a difference between the budget year and the plan years. So we know that, and I think the chair's already done an exercise on that, the delta between what fiscal year '26 looked like as a plan year versus, okay, now we need to fund it, oh, look, it went down. But I think that's also part of the planning, because, and I don't mean that as a criticism of anybody, especially my department heads that are populating these reports. So when I look at the out years, so to speak, and I appreciate the question, because the eye is drawn to fiscal year '27, and you say, okay, what are the outliers? Well, we're going to have to make a decision on the $9.1 million building for DPW. Now, that was in the out years and previous years report. DPW has asked it to come forward. That's going to be as much a policy decision with the select board, with negotiations and discussions with the finance committee, as well as with capital outlay. So that $9 million may come off the plan in '27.
And the pipe discontinuity project got pushed from this year to next year,
Right, correct, and
because they were looking at their resources and having
as well
somebody
as state
new
projects
in-
that might
Right.
align with
When
it,
they
correct.
So when we get to next year, that'll be a big discussion.
And so
but-
for me, then I look at the out years, and the out years tend to be more benign. And you can see in the out years, you've got 5.1 and 5.3.
But then it's not our role as a capital budget planning group here to sort of try to do that spread. We rely on the department heads to make the informed decision and let the chips fall as they may, I guess.
Well, last year, I'll give an example of, Ginny is looking for her dehumidifying system in the library, and Sean had put it out a couple of years. And I said last year, why don't we, if she feels she needs it more than Sean thinks she needs it, right?
Right.
If we look at the budget, it happened that, in that plan, the year in had less money needed in it than the year he had it in. I said, why wouldn't we consider moving it forward? If there's less money in that year's budget, maybe it makes more sense to do that. So it's not like we don't sometimes question those things, we do.
Okay.
Correct, and if I may, I'm going to put it out there on the record again. I don't think it's any secret that I've relied upon my expertise and understanding of governance documents. And I am the letter of the law, and the charter requires the town administrator to build the plan and working through you folks. And the charter requires the town administrator to come up with a funding scenario. So, to that end, the former chair and I met late summer to start this process, and I told him, unless there are major changes in an upward direction, I think the budget for '26 is coming together nicely, and that remains the case. Even though we're relying upon the free cash number, which we now know we won't get until January. But part of my decision-making is if I see something in there that I know is never gonna fly, I'm not gonna curtail it. It's not gonna disappear before it comes here. But early on in your process, I'm gonna say, we don't have the money for that. So if we're gonna have the money for that, I need to go back to the select board and say, do you want to release your prohibition on overrides versus debt exclusions? Do we want to do a capital exclusion? Because all things being equal, we're not going to have cash available.
Can I just
So it's safe to say then, based on what you just said, that everything for fiscal year '26 is, in your view, doable?
Fiscal year '26 remains balanced, is the way I've been trying to say it.
Rich?
Yes. We have a target, we've been here an hour and 15 minutes, not that I'm timing it or anything. We have a target of, in a week, the 9th, for the Board of Selectmen. And our focus should be on '26. That's where we're, 90% of our discussion with the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee is going to be on '26. We haven't even addressed, and I'm saying historically, going line by line, do we vote for it or not? We have a week. I don't want to meet unless we have to, but we haven't even addressed '26. It's the budget year and the plan. The plan is more flexible because we have the ability to change it. The budget is flexible. We have the ability to change it before town meeting. So we've had the spring to do it. So I'm recommending that we try to address '26 closely today,
Yes, we're gonna do that next.
before dinner.
Yes, we're gonna do that next. I do have one other question. On this schedule, is the exempt debt included in this schedule? I just need to ask.
Sorry, I was looking at the
Is the
plan.
exempt debt included in this?
Doesn't it say? I think the earlier report showed that as well, right? That the general fund debt is excluded in,
What is exempt debt? I'm sorry.
It's the
what
debt
was
that you,
excluded by debt exclusions versus,
Is that the debt that makes debt service go over 2.5%, or?
Correct.
Yeah.
There'd be a
2.5%
bond
growth.
authorization, and the wording at the end would say contingent upon Prop 2.5 debt exclusion. And then
Right.
it would go to the
Okay,
voters,
okay.
and they would say up or down on it.
So hopefully it is
it
included.
is, yeah, that's what I'm hoping.
yes,
It is, okay.
right?
And then I just wanna get you on
If I
the,
may, real quick, just to make sure.
School is the only exclusion from this.
right.
Long-term debt inside,
that's what I wanna
long-term
make
debt
sure.
outside. I think it's all in there. Yeah. So the answer is yes.
Okay.
And that's because the state requires that in the forms that we have to fill out.
I'm going to ask one more question, and it's a really quick one, and it was, and I think Scott and I have been both asking this, about the planning of the debt out, of the debt servicing numbers out over time. Joe, are you saying that will happen, or you're not assuming it will happen?
Meaning the preparation of a forecast of that debt service in the
Yes.
next 5 years.
The forecasting is critical for what I need to do and want to do, and that has to include debt.
Okay,
And then more specifically, what I may have been equivocating on is that balance plan, the balance budget for fiscal year '26. So I'm gonna put a number out there right now, and I apologize in advance, because normally this would go to the select board first, as I am their agent, and as they've requested to have critical information ahead of time. But on the fiscal year '26 plan, you know, we're looking at now a bottom line number of $9,827,149. Within that, the town would be looking to borrow $5.6 million. 2.5 for irrigation, but the expectation is that is gonna be, the debt service will be paid by the Golf Improvement Fund. And then we would be doing debt exclusions on the ambulance and engine, so that's 2.4, and resuming the road improvements borrowing that we've done before, so that's 3.1. So of the 5.6, 3.1 would be looked to be outside the limit, and 2.5 would be inside the limit. Did I say that right?
3.1 is excluded and 2.5
Yep.
in, yes.
Okay,
That's the concept right now.
Great.
good,
I have just one other question.
okay.
On the blue sheet, I just happened to look at the warrant from last May, and the debt service budget for 2025 is $3,534,589, which leads me to believe that this last line on the blue sheet is really 2025.
Well, that's, you're looking, oh, no, you're looking at fiscal year, okay.
Yeah. So I just wanted to point that out since I noticed that it matches the warrant number in the 2025 column.
And you thought it was a 2026 number?
It says 24
It says
here.
2024. So I don't know if the other years are all off by 1 year, but that one seems to be off by 1 year. It seems to be the 2025
And
number.
that's what Ed and I are gonna meet after
Yes.
this meeting, because I struggle with, I know the state said fiscal year,
But is it
but there's an
calendar?
element of town meeting
Yeah,
and all of that,
that might
correct?
be the 2024.
Yep, so I filled in the blanks for fiscal year 2024.
Yeah.
All the state had populated was the EQV
Yeah,
and the population.
so that last line for debt service is really still an estimate,
Correct,
Yeah, 'cause
4.32?
the year that just began.
correct, and I think more accurately is not yet fully reported.
Yeah, okay.
All right, I'm gonna close off the Q&A, and on the debt, unless there's something really important somebody wants to ask. And let's get into voting on the capital plan. So let's start with fiscal year 2026. And we're gonna go individually from the top of this sheet to the bottom.
Skipping the zeros, I hope.
We'll skip all the zeros, right? We can do that, Joe?
Yep.
And,
I have one question, Mr. Chair.
Oh, come on.
If I may, just 5.6 is going to be borrowed of the 5, and so therefore 3, 2, or whatever, the balance would be from free cash? Is that,
Other available funds that,
or available funds? Okay,
it could be money from a different reserve or fund set aside for a specific purpose.
okay, thanks.
all right, so let's start with the,
Madam Chair, can I just offer one more thing for the record?
yes.
So generally speaking, we've been talking about free cash. Free cash will be, is expected to be relied upon to balance the plan. The free cash was submitted the end of October, I believe. However, the state is working on tax rate certifications. Our tax rate is set. We've got a very good one. So we'll have that formalized in January. I've been operating under the assumption that it should fall somewhere between $5 and $6 million. That was the best estimate from our last interim finance director, who is our financial consultant, and we stand by that.
Okay. I would just like us to come back once you get the funding sources
Sure.
and review them as a group. But we're doing this without funding sources, but understanding that we've got a good idea of where funding is coming from. So we're going to vote on the projects. We're going to start with Channel 8. They're looking in fiscal year '26 for $26,000. Can I have a motion to accept the, or
So
do I just
moved.
do a vote, Joe? How do we do this? Just vote on whether we accept the
Well, if you're
project?
going to do a vote, you need motions and seconds, technically.
Okay, so I need a motion on that Channel 8 for $26,000 in fiscal year '26.
Make
You actually don't have to vote on it, it's under 50. Am I correct, Joe?
That's true.
So that could be an article that would be capital under 50. You could vote it. The funding source comes from cable itself.
It's an,
Let's just vote it for the sake of voting it, and then we know we've done it.
Moved.
Second?
Second.
So that was Scott who motioned and Paul who seconded. Now I've got to take a head count. So Frank, you want to vote? Frank's a yay.
Aye.
Aye.
Yay.
Mark is an aye.
Aye.
Scott's an aye.
Rich, aye.
and I.
Martha, aye.
Aye.
Paul is an aye. Let's move down to the 204 Sisson Road Middle School project for $265,000. Can I have a motion to accept that project? Scott motioned. Second?
Second the motion.
Paul seconded. Frank?
Aye.
Mark?
Opposed.
Opposed, okay.
Aye.
Scott?
Aye. Rich.
And I.
Martha, aye.
Aye.
Okay, so one negative vote.
You got to put the, who's counting? I mean, who's,
Judith is going to take our notes for this meeting.
okay, so 6-1.
Right.
Motion carries.
Yeah, I understand.
The DPW complex, the repair of $100,000. Can I have a motion to accept that project?
Moved.
Scott approves.
Second the motion.
Paul seconded. Frank?
Aye.
Mark?
Aye.
Aye.
Scott?
Aye.
And I.
Martha, aye.
Aye.
Okay, so that's 7-0. All right, let's move, what would be Brooks Academy under facilities for $1,300,149. Can I have a motion to approve?
Make the motion, Madam Chair.
Paul? makes a
Second.
motion. Scott, second. Frank?
Aye.
Mark?
Aye.
Aye.
Rich?
Aye, with that, with the caveat, not a caveat, but the 149 means nothing. I mean, the whole thing is based on 000, so 1 million point 3 should be the number.
Yeah, isn't that what I said, 1,300,149?
I don't care about the 149, the whole, whatever, I'm just making a comment. Take it.
That's what the worksheet is for, so let's just move it.
So the worksheet should shave 1.13.
We'd still need to do the 149. The expectation from the select board is that when you put all the funds together, as you'll see on the form,
Well, how about the other 1,000 numbers that are on here? I'm sure they have numbers in the
Trailers.
1, 2, 3 digits.
so they don't.
They don't, they're all whole numbers?
Correct. The,
Okay, my mistake, okay.
He's backing into that sinking fund.
it's the
Thank you,
2.3
Frank.
million that I think they're hoping to have
Right.
in the total number.
Okay, so are you an aye? Rich?
Aye, yeah.
And I.
Martha, aye.
Aye.
Okay, 7-0.
So, Madam Chair, if I could just state then, the total the subtotal line for facilities maintenance then becomes $1,665,149.
Great, correct. Okay, moving on, ambulances. Can I have a motion for the $1.1 million for 2 ambulances?
So moved.
Second?
Second the motion.
Paul? Frank?
Aye.
Mark?
Aye.
Scott?
Aye.
Rich?
Aye.
Ian?
I.
Martha, aye.
Aye.
7-0. All right, can I have a motion for the $1.3 million for fire equipment vehicles?
So moved.
Scott?
Second the motion.
Paul? Frank?
Aye.
Mark?
Aye.
Aye.
Rich, aye.
And I.
Martha, aye.
Aye.
Paul, aye. 7-0. Let's move on to golf, the irrigation update for $2.5 million. Can I have a motion to approve the $2.5 million?
So moved.
Scott?
Second the motion.
Paul, second. Frank?
Aye.
Mark?
Aye.
Scott?
Aye.
Rich?
Aye.
Ann?
I.
Martha, aye. Paul?
Aye.
7-0. Moving on, Saquatucket bulkhead replacement at $770,000. Can I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Ann? Second? Nobody wants to second?
Second. Second.
Is-
Frank
Frank
seconded.
seconded.
Let's vote. Frank,
Aye.
Mark,
Opposed?
okay? Scott?
I asked this question in advance. The caveat being that I would like to insert to the record is that we heard that this study, which is I think 5 or 7 years old, is going to be reevaluated. The condition of the bulkhead is going to be reexamined, and potentially new recommendations are going to be put forward as to the timing and the extent of repairs that are required. And the cost of that reexamination is far less than $770,000. So I just want to make sure that we're not giving a blank check of that amount of $770,000 when what we discussed is a very inexpensive reexamination of the bulkhead.
And he said that he's going to have that number, I think 70,000, but he's going to have a number whether it has to be replaced or not the next year. So
And some of this
before
is-
the town meeting.
And some of this is design, and I would say that you put in the total amount because you're going to the outside, and it will trend down. It's not like we're giving them a blank check and say, go spend 770, okay? It's that if you need 770, it's gonna be there for a coming $9 million potential project,
That's the way I understood it as
understand
well.
that.
yeah.
So are you a positive vote?
I'm
with-
not yet, no,
So you're a negative? vote?
negative.
Okay, so, negative.
Aye. Rich?
And
Aye.
I would vote no.
So we're 4-3.
Positive.
Can we insert the caveat that, no, we cannot? Okay.
Not yet. You know, your task is to help me build a plan. You've decided 4 in favor, 3 against to add this to the plan. Doesn't mean you can't have conversation next week and ongoing.
Yep.
It also doesn't mean we can't change it until town meeting.
Right.
Okay, so
Okay.
that keeps it open.
All right, let's look at the harbor master's vehicle replacement for $75,000. Can I have a motion for $75,000?
Motion.
Second the motion.
Frank,
Aye.
Mark,
Aye.
Scott,
Aye.
Rich,
Aye.
I.
Martha, aye. Paul?
Aye.
Okay, great. Let's move on to information technology. This is the technology reinvestment for $250,000. Can I have a motion for this project? $250,000.
So moved.
Second the
Motion.
motion.
Paul seconds. Frank,
Aye.
Mark,
Aye.
Paul,
Aye.
and Scott. Rich,
Aye.
Ann,
I.
Martha, aye.
Aye.
Okay, so that one passes. $100,000 for the electronic records content management project. Can I have a motion for $100,000?
So moved.
Second,
Second the motion.
Frank,
Aye.
Mark,
Aye.
Scott,
Aye.
Rich,
I've got a question.
yes.
I thought, these are capital expenses. I thought these are going through the operating expense. Are they capital or operating?
This is a project, it's meant to cease after fiscal year 2030. We believe that this is the full cost of digitizing every record that the town has.
It says town cruiser replacement.
I thought we were on electronic records.
No, we've
Electronic
got-
records
I'm
content
sorry,
management.
I'm sorry. We're on the 100,000?
Yeah,
Yep.
I'm sorry. Yes.
Rich is an aye. Ann,
I.
Martha, aye. Paul?
Aye.
7-0. Okay, now the cruiser replacement for $210,000. Can I have a motion on the cruiser replacement?
Madam Chair, before a motion, there may want to be discussion.
Oh.
So if I could, Rich, we're trying it in the capital plan again this year. I think there's been
Okay, but the
vacillating
discussion,
back and forth between operating and capital. I believe fiscal year ~25 was in capital, so we're looking to perpetuate that again.
For cruisers.
okay, but I think, again, I could be wrong, sure, probably am. The discussion we have with the police department is that they would be expensed every year. In fact, that was a discussion that your finance director, in fact, said earlier today, that like police vehicles are expensed yearly versus like
Oh,
a
he
fire
said-
truck.
It could be within the capital budget, and the funding source could be other than bonding.
Right. That's
So
come
that
out of
whether you
cash.
put it in the capital budget or the operating budget, the funding source would be, other than bonding, would be my recommendation.
And it sounded like by process of elimination, that's where it is coming from. Because you mentioned the debts funded projects in the 26 column, and cruisers was not one of those items.
Correct.
Right.
Thank you for noticing.
I'm, having it on the capital, it assumes to me that there's some kind of, um, expensing it on a yearly basis or depreciating it. If it's on the, if it's purely expensed, the depreciation issue really doesn't come in. And I'm assuming we're not worried about depreciation schedules per se.
Per se, correct. Yep.
So it's on.
If I
it's
may,
on-
I don't look at this really any different than engines or ambulances, and you can see with ambulances, we're not doing one every 5 years anymore, we're not even doing one every 3. So
What made the change?
I think it's a preference, to be quite honest. When I first started here 5 years ago, cruisers were in the capital plan.
Right, and then
The
it went-
board wanted to take them out, put them in the operating budget.
Right.
So for me, the reason why I don't like that is you've now increased the police budget, which is one of the 3 biggest budgets outside of education.
With the vehicles.
With the vehicles.
So
And
we're
so then
going-
when we start talking
But we're
about,
going backwards to this.
that's what I would recommend, because
Okay.
the operating budget is in the tune of $45 million. So if there's ever things that we want to look to cut, we typically go to the operating budget. And I think the cruisers would be the first thing surrendered. That's why, if we truly believe we need cruisers, we put it in the capital.
Capital.
I'm with you.
And
Okay.
they're
Okay.
getting more expensive, so they meet the
Right.
$50,000 number. Maybe the depreciation, the lifespan isn't any better, but
Useful life is a constant concept throughout procurement, borrowing, and, as we budget. To the gentleman's question, it's been a preference expressed by the select board. We're gonna try it again in the capital.
Okay.
all right, so can I get a motion on the $210,000 police cruiser?
So, second the motion.
Second. Did you have a
No,
question?
we were in the middle of the vote, I thought on
Oh, yeah, we already
Oh, we
voted.
were?
it. Yeah.
Aye.
Okay, we were,
That's
stopped it. Rich, you screwed me up, sorry.
Sorry,
Okay.
story of my life.
Ann,
Aye.
and I'm an aye. Paul?
Aye.
7-0, sorry, I'm just repeating.
No worries.
The equipment replacement of $51,000, I forget what that's for, but I think it's vests or tasers or something like that.
Yeah,
Can I get a motion?
so moved.
Second the motion.
Paul? Frank?
Aye.
Mark?
Aye.
Scott?
Aye.
Rich?
Rich, aye.
And aye.
Martha, aye.
Aye.
Paul, aye, 7-0. All right, now we're on road maintenance for $700,000. Can I get a motion on the $700,000 project?
So moved.
Second,
Second the motion.
Paul. Frank?
Aye.
Mark?
Aye.
Scott?
Aye.
Rich?
Aye.
Ann?
Aye.
Martha, aye. Paul?
Aye.
7-0. And the vehicle replacements in Public Works for $830,000. Can I get a motion on that?
So moved.
Scott, thank you.
Second the motion.
Paul, seconds. Frank?
Aye.
Mark?
Aye, but we should always have in front of us, rather than after the fact, getting that vehicle replacement schedule. That should be with our deliberation, so.
I will
Agreed.
request that earlier in the process next year, Mark. Thank you. Scott?
Aye.
If I may, Madam Chair, very quickly, the road schedule and the vehicle schedules can be added with the applications.
Okay, that'd be great.
Yep.
Rich?
Aye.
Ann?
Aye.
Martha, aye.
Aye.
Paul, aye, 7-0. The vehicle replacements in wastewater for $150,000. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second the motion.
Paul, seconds. Frank?
Aye.
Mark?
Aye.
Scott?
Aye.
Rich?
Aye.
Ann?
Aye.
Martha, aye. Paul?
Aye.
7-0. Last one, the pipe discontinuity upgrade, $100,000. Can I please get a motion?
So moved.
Scott?
Second the motion.
Paul? Frank?
Aye.
Mark?
Aye.
Aye.
Rich,
Scott?
aye.
Rich, aye.
And I.
Martha, aye. And
Aye.
Paul, aye. Okay. So now we've done fiscal year 2026.
Madam Chair, if I could just state for the record, the net result of the votes that you've taken is for an annual total for fiscal year 2026 of $9,827,149.
Great.
Thank you.
And now, how do we do the rest of the plan? Do we have to vote on the rest of the plan or just on 26?
It's the will of the body. If I were you, I'd look to your
Yeah, I know he
far
doesn't want to
right.
do it right.
Nice try, Rich.
I would look at the 56 and change, which now goes to,
The total now for the five-year plan is $58,123,190. So, Madam Chair and members, what you could do, you've approved the budget by a series of majority votes. You could then, as with the article, the leading article would become a town meeting, vote to adopt the five-year plan.
which is that 58 million.
58,123.
And again, I have to drill this in because it happened more than once to the Capital Outlay Committee. We normally meet before town meeting in a private room, okay, not at the meeting. If the meeting starts at 6:30, we normally come at 5:30, we look this over, and the town administrator will come in and say, hey, there's a change, or hey, we need to do this, or hey, or is everything approved? And that's where this becomes flexible. So we can vote for now we're voting for the plan itself, the 5 years, the number of, or the iterations here. It's a one-shot deal. So we vote for the plan, which is subject to change until town meeting, to town meeting.
So can I get a motion for the five-year plan at $58,123,190?
So moved.
Motion.
Can I,
Second
so
the motion.
Paul seconding and Frank put the motion forward, and now we'll take a vote. Frank?
Aye.
Mark?
Aye.
Scott?
Aye, with the caveat about timing across the years and funding sources
They're all-
not being known.
They're all just going to change.
The vote is aye.
Thank you.
Gee, I gotta think about it. No, aye.
Rich? Ann?
Aye.
Martha? Aye.
Aye.
Okay, so 7-0. I just want to, can I just ask, because I want to be able to speak to some of the objections at the joint meeting. So Mark, you voted no on the 204. What was your, if you don't mind sharing that?
Sure. There are 3 large outstanding projects on that building: the roof, the fire alarm system,
So it's about resources?
and generator. And, you know, I even heard at a selectmen's meeting, we have too many outstanding things.
Okay,
The other thing, that amount is primarily for the masonry on the outside.
Yeah.
The repairs are not functional per se, they're aesthetic. In other words, a lot of it is a wall that is not retaining in any soil. So is it desirable? Yes. Is it needed right now? No. That's why.
okay, I appreciate that.
Can I make a comment to that? What comes up during the discussion with them, and this has been told to previous capital outlay meetings, is that we're not supposed to tell the workers, the experts, how to do their job. So I just throw that as a caveat.
Right.
He has the expertise. We've had people on the committee that have made careers out of roofing, and they have come up with, experience and everything. And what we get back is, we pay people, that's their job, and so, just, if you're there and you get back, that's what might happen.
So I looked at it this way, that as advisory, right? I just want them to hear where there were disagreements, that's all.
And I agree with you.
It doesn't mean we didn't all agree with Mark, so,
And
but he
that
is
proves by
allowed
the
his-
vote, yeah.
okay.
All I'm saying is, you may expect, you're going to be sitting hopefully with us rather than on than the finance side.
Or at least in the middle.
He
Can you
sits
sit
in the middle.
Put you with the
Feel good?
selectmen.
Two seats up front.
Yeah, that's it.
Here we go.
We also had 3 negative votes on the Saquotucket bulkhead repair, and is that primarily because you all want to see
Study.
the study first? Is that?
Right.
Okay, okay, I just need to know that. Okay, great. And with that, I would just ask one thing, Joe. I put together a schedule, and I'll send it around to everybody, that just shows that it's a numbers schedule. It's pretty involved, but it shows the changes that we had from last year to this year.
Good.
Because that is, I think, what they
Comes
want to hear in the joint meeting. It helps sort of bring it to a summary, I think, and we can I'll bring it even further to a summary, but can we put that in the public package? Is that possible?
You certainly may.
Okay. Would
So,
you
what
advise against it, or?
No, no. I have a speech that I'd like to make at the very end before you adjourn.
Okay,
Part of that speech would be to say thank you for the work that you've done, and that's part of the work that you're doing. So I have no objections whatsoever.
yeah,
I
if
do
they
think
can
it's
look at
proper
it.
for you to share it with everybody, and unless there's objection from the committee members. So if there is objection, we could talk about it de novo, as the lawyers say, meaning at the hearing.
Okay.
But if there's no objection, the more that we can add to the packet, I think the board would appreciate.
Yeah, I
As
think
well
it
as
would just-
Finance Committee.
Can you give it to us ahead, or
Yeah,
no?
I'm gonna send it to you today.
Okay.
I'll send it out today to everybody.
I've got a question for Joe. May I?
Yeah,
Please.
please.
Thank you. The 9th, according to the charter, or whatever we're following, is the day that this stuff has to be presented, correct?
So the charter requires that the joint meeting happen before the end of December.
Okay. Having a vote 4-3, and it's trying to find out studies and so forth to make it more affirmative or more negative, are those studies available prior to the end of December? Do you know?
I don't believe so. However,
Okay.
what I'm going to do at the conclusion of this is prepare the packet material for the Finance Committee and Select Board, which would be the big sheet, all of the applications, sorted by department, any other materials such as an analysis of prior year to current year. And then I'm going to alert the 2 department heads that do not enjoy unanimity on their projects to be aware of that, so that they may be present to either answer questions or to at least hear the concerns. But last but not least, you all, this still isn't my speech yet, I'm going to reserve my time, Madam Chair, but you all have done everything required of you under the charter, as have our department heads. You have helped me produce a plan and a potential budget for our capital outlay plan for fiscal year 26 through 30 that we will now talk about with the executive body of the town, the select board, and the agent of the legislative body, the Finance Committee. What follows that discussion is I then go back and create appropriating articles based on votes of the select board. So this isn't done by any stretch of the imagination whatsoever. However, I don't expect any more projects to be added. You never know, unforeseen being what they are. But I think we have a strong understanding of the capital needs for fiscal year '26. And so that's what will be discussed Monday evening, the 9th.
Okay, and I'm only bringing this up historically. Historically, last year, from the time that we do the presentation in December, we didn't meet. I met with Joe in July, 7 months. And then we didn't get back together till October. That's a long time. What we tried to do the year before and years before is that we got the community center bus. And the locations that we questioned, rather than driving and trying to squeeze it all in October or September, we did in the spring, when we're on this hiatus. There's also some issues that we can meet that are sort of non-town meeting issues that we can discuss, like with the finance director or with any department manager and so forth, department head, that we can meet in the spring. So I would recommend that we do not go dead,
Yes,
you know.
I think we all agree.
So I think, you know, whatever the status is in terms of what the town is doing and so forth, I make a recommendation that Martha, you go forward and plan something, you know, after the holidays or when the snow's
Well, when the
gone.
when the funding's made available, I definitely want us to get back together.
Yeah, the other thing is, it's Joe's responsibility to decide where the funding comes for each project, not us.
I don't disagree, but as part of our advisory role, we should at least, I feel like we should review it.
What I'm saying is, it's up to him to decide where it comes from.
And the way that I would like to have you do that is for you to be aware of the appropriating articles
Right.
Yeah.
that will be in the warrant so that you can see it, because it's manifest of the work that you've done.
Right.
And if I may now transition into my speech, Madam Chair? But truly, I can't thank you all enough for your efforts, and I cannot miss the opportunity to say, as you said, Madam Chair, at the beginning, to have 7 of you present, and to have each of those stations that are acknowledged present includes Frank. I'm not excluding Frank. He is present. To have all of you present and participating, whether it's remote or in person, to have 7 of you is how it was drawn up. And I feel and see a difference, and I really appreciate the fact that you were able to create a schedule that all 7 of you could commit to, that I think you did great work with the department heads in questioning them, and in short time have built a solid plan that we can all be proud of. So I can't thank you enough for all of those efforts. And then part of the gratitude would be demonstrated by me continuing with the chair to update you on more information as it becomes available ahead of town meeting.
And I would just say, I am new at this. I don't do it with the efficiency that Rich has done it in the past, and I will try to get better to make these meetings a little quicker. But
As they
if
said,
you all stay in your seats, it's gonna make it easier, because then we don't have to go over and over.
there's a
this stuff.
Latin phrase I had, I
What
think
is it?
in Latin 2 or
Move your
Latin
butt?
3 in high school. No, repetition is the mother of learning. And that's what this is all about.
Yeah.
That was Latin.
Latin 3,
I
yeah.
think you did a nice job, Martha, so
Thank you. I worry they were really long, so I apologize for that.
they were definitely long.
All right, I think we're done. Our next get-together is next Monday night at,
So you'll be meeting jointly with the Select Board, the Finance Committee, here in the Griffin Room, no earlier than 6 PM. I'll be working with the Chair of the Select Board to finalize the agenda for Monday night, today, and tomorrow. This is typically the first thing out of, after public comment or consent.
awesome.
I
And
make
and
the
I'm,
motion.
just so you all know, I'm gonna do my little, if I can at the beginning, my 5-minute report to the committee, because I think it will lay out sort of what we've been working on and what.
They've
Sure.
been waiting for it.
I know. They're gonna love mine. I got it in
You
there.
got it.
Wait and see. It's gonna be good.
And then Paul, and then Paul.
No. All right, can I have a motion to adjourn?
Make a motion.
Second the motion.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, have a nice day.
Thank